Please be seated. I call this meeting to order, and I would entertain a motion to reconvene in open session, moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Foxton. All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, I will go to the delegations. Our first presentation will be Julia Manuel, Director of Waterloo Regional Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Treatment Center, to talk about the Human Trafficking Toolkit with Matt Demarte and Sarah Gilbert, Project Manager. Welcome, Julia.
Good evening, Chair Redmond and members of Regional Council. Thank you for the opportunity to come and address the Council this evening. My name is Julia Manuel. I am the Director of the Sexual Assault Domestic Violence Treatment Center, and I'd also like to introduce Detective Constable Matt Demarte and Sarah Gilbert, who is our Project Manager. Our program also chairs the multidisciplinary response to combat human trafficking within our region, and it is comprised of Waterloo Regional Police Services Human Trafficking Unit, the Youth Protection Unit, Family and Children's Services, and Victim Services, and of course members of our team. Approximately a year and a half ago, we received a grant from the Ministry of Community and Social Services for the amount of $10,000 to create an educational campaign to address human trafficking within our community. The community chose to hire Sarah as project manager and Emma Lipinski to assist her in creating a toolkit that could be utilized by school boards and by community partners. The toolkit is now complete, and we are excited to promote this week to recognize Provincial Human Trafficking Awareness Day on Saturday, February 22nd. And I would like to turn it over now to Sarah just to give you a brief overview of our toolkit.
Okay, good evening, Chair Redmond and members of Council, and thank you so much for having us tonight. So you've already heard a little bit about, sorry, are we just the slides? So we've already heard a little bit about the project and the committee background, and now I'm going to talk a bit about the research and development process behind the toolkit, provide a walkthrough of the toolkit materials, talk a little bit about how the toolkit has been used so far, and then talk about the planned next steps. So we began the research and development process by conducting a needs assessment. So we did this to be able to inform the evidence-based development of the toolkit and to also ensure that we weren't duplicating any efforts that already existed in the community at that time. So what we did was we reached out to a sample of high school teachers, principals, and parents via survey to identify what was currently being done in high schools at that time, if anything, the degree of support from parents and educators, and any challenges or barriers to implementation and uptake, and ideas for what should and should not be included in a toolkit of this kind. So what we found was that at the time of the needs assessment, no education was being provided in Waterloo Region high schools. And there was also a high degree of support from parents and educators. So for instance, 96% of parents indicated that they definitely would be in support of high school students receiving information on human trafficking awareness and prevention. Some potential barriers noted included a potential lack of awareness by school staff that this is even an issue that happens in our communities, and also the potential that parents might not be comfortable with the subject matter at hand, although those concerns weren't noted within the parents in our particular sample. Some of the suggestions provided included that people wanted to see relevant statistics, they wanted to see resources for help, and they also echoed that they didn't want to see the issue being sugar-coated. So the next step in the research process involved a scan to see what else had already been done in this area, both to make sure that we weren't reinventing the wheel, and to also to learn from the work of others. So one of the campaigns that stuck out was the national I'm Not For Sale campaign that the RCMP developed back in 2012. As a component of this campaign, they had a youth awareness toolkit, which really provides information from a nationwide lens. So this toolkit included posters, a PowerPoint presentation, and a booklet. And we really liked this format, and the RCMP indicated to us that they had success with it. So we decided to model our toolkit in the same fashion. And we also created a website to act as a hub for information and for accessing the toolkit. So really the goal of our toolkit is to prevent human trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation in Waterloo region among youth age 13 plus by raising awareness of the issue from a local lens, which is really a distinction from the RCMP toolkit, which looks at the issue more from a national perspective. So the key focus is on youth awareness and empowerment. We really want to boost awareness and perceived susceptibility by letting youth know that this issue happens here in our communities, this is who it's happening to, and this is how it happens. And we also want to equip youth with knowledge, practical and modern safety tips, and key contacts for help. Lastly, our research sources included local field expert input, and then published literature and gray literature. So now I'll give you a brief walkthrough of the toolkit materials. So I'll start off by talking about our PowerPoint presentation. So just in the interest of time, I'm just going to give you a sample of some of the slides, and I will be breezing through them quite quickly, so you won't have the chance to actually read the content on the slides. I just wanted to make that clear as I go through. The presentation is designed such that anyone can deliver it. You don't necessarily have to have knowledge in the subject matter, as all of the slides are complete with complete speaking notes and suggestions for engagement with the audience and discussion suggestions. So we begin by talking about, by bringing up some key definitions to clarify what we're talking about. So we provide the definition for human smuggling, which is often confused with human trafficking. We talk about what human trafficking is and provide some definition and explanation. We acknowledge that there are a variety of different forms of human trafficking and that this is a major issue on a global scale. We then kind of hone in on the situation in Canada and speak specifically about sex trafficking. We provide some police-reported human trafficking incident stats, acknowledging that this is a major underestimation of the problem due to the fact that it is such a hidden crime. And then we talk a little bit about who is at risk, but still acknowledging that no one is immune to this issue. We talk about some of the high-risk groups, and also some of the characteristics that might make someone vulnerable to victimization. And then we hone in and we talk about the situation in Waterloo region specifically, and we talk about some of the factors that make our area vulnerable. So for instance, being close to the 401 and the QEW, which really serve as pipelines for moving people in and out of the region from big city to big city, and also just from hotel to hotel along those major highways, which is strategic in the sense that it allows traffickers to avoid detection and also to isolate their victims. So we have a bit of a discussion about those types of factors. And then we talk about some of the local stats. So we have some local police stats. So for instance, in 2019, there were 90 investigations of human trafficking, and this number is up compared to previous years. And then we go over the process of exploitation, some of the strategies that traffickers often use to exploit people. So in a stepwise fashion, we talk about luring, grooming and gaming, coercion and manipulation, and ultimately exploitation. And this is all told kind of in a storyline type of fashion. We provide some links to videos about Canadian sex trafficking survivors and how they came to be trafficked. We provide some of the signs that someone might be being lured or groomed, or that they're already a victim of sex trafficking. And then we provide some practical tips on what to do if you think that a friend is being exploited, what to do if you're ever approached, how to stay safe online, as traffickers commonly use social media to access and lure young people. Some information on how to stay safe at parties and social gatherings. And then we provide some key service provider contact information. And the discussion notes on these slides provide descriptions of what each service provider offers. So the next component of the toolkit is a booklet, and in the interest of time, I won't be showcasing the booklet in full. It is really the Coles notes of the presentation, just in a more succinct, reader-friendly format. So it's really intended to be a take-home resource. In the minutes from this meeting, I will post a link to the booklet, so you're able to have a look at it if you're interested. The next component is the poster. And the imagery behind this poster really came from, as I was researching this topic, the thing that kept sticking out in my mind was the metaphor of a wolf in sheep's clothing, since so often it's the case in sex trafficking where a trafficker will pretend to be kind or in love to lure a vulnerable person into sex trafficking. So this image, coupled with the phrase, "be careful who you trust," is really intended to implore to youth that not everyone has your best interests in mind. And then it's kind of difficult to see, I apologize, but the remainder of the text really just provides some information on what sex trafficking is and how it happens, and then some key service provider information and a link to our website, which I will briefly show you now. So the website is really the booklet just in web format. So it has all of the same type of information as the presentation. I will draw your information to the Find Help tab, where we have all of the service provider information linked with live links to all of their contact information and full descriptions on what each provides. And then there's a link for actually accessing the toolkit, where we have our contact information and what is actually in the toolkit. So I'll just go back to the presentation. So just to wrap up, I wanted to touch on how the toolkit has already been used. So we had early consultations with the public and the Catholic school boards, and we've received support from the public board to embed the toolkit in their high school curriculum. So far, they've put up 200 posters in 19 high schools. The presentation has been used for professional development days and in training for school resource officers. It's also been given to a variety of grade 9 classes, and we've received really great feedback on it. And then our website is also linked on the Waterloo Region Police Service school protocol. And then in terms of next steps, our toolkit is available on an ongoing basis via our website, and we've received requests from a variety of community organizations. And we're also coordinating a launch this month, which has included some community outreach by getting our posters out in places like bars, washroom stalls at en routes, and a variety of other locations throughout the region. And then lastly, as Julia mentioned, on February 22nd, we will be doing a media release, which will coincide with Human Trafficking Awareness Day. So it really is an opportunity to piggyback on that momentum and just raise further awareness of the issue. So that is it for the presentation. I don't know if there's time for questions, but we would be happy to take any if there are any.
Thank you, and very well done, Sarah. Sarah and Julia and Mark, right? Presented at the police board this morning, so you were very concise and precise. So again, well done, Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, and through the chair. I'm running Chelsea's Story in North Dumfries on March 31st. This is such a hot issue, and the more I think about it, the more I can draw parallels to individuals I've known that have been in dangerous situations. I would love to be able to have some of those posters, if I could, please, to put up and go about. I'm inviting Southwood Secondary School, as well as I'm hitting the grade 8s as well. But I'm not only inviting the parents, I'm trying to invite grandparents. Because, see, the parents can't do it alone anymore. They're both working now. They're both busier than sin. And if the grandparents or elderly people don't step up and help out, the kids fall through the cracks. Mm-hmm. So this is the message I'm trying to push through, and this is perfect timing for me, so if I could get some posters, I'd really appreciate it.
Absolutely, yes. I'll leave our contact information and you can get in touch.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. We actually have a
Vrbanovic.
few copies here if you'd like to take some now.
Councillor Vrbanovic.
Well, thank you very much for coming in and for the great work that you folks are doing. This will seem strange, but last night I was at an infrastructure dinner in Toronto, and this ended up being the topic of conversation at our table for about half an hour because Minister Laurie Scott, who's the infrastructure minister, has been quite passionate on this issue. And in fact, a number of us were, I think Chair Redmond and others were at the en route last summer or fall when the logo changed or the signage changed in terms of your advocacy campaign. But everything you've talked about, I think, is wonderful. But the one thing where I think maybe we need to do more is in terms of raising awareness about this issue with adults. I mean, it's obviously important for kids to know, but I think there's a whole lot of adults in the community that need to be aware. And one of the things that the Minister Scott said in one of the conversations that she was in was bankers were meeting with some victims and were saying, like, what could we possibly do? And they were actually pointing out, well, there actually is a whole lot of things you can do just by looking at our actions. We deposit money at strange hours of the night. We use, our Interact card to buy junk food at all hours of the, like, there's transactional kinds of things. Now, there's obviously privacy issues that you need to work around, but there are things that could actually help signal that somebody's fallen victim. And so I think we really need to look at, as a community, are there more things we can do to raise awareness amongst adults as well? And I don't know if that's billboard campaigns or, social media for Facebook, which is, apparently for grandparents now, or whatever is appropriate. But I think that's the kind of thing we might want to tackle as well. And in addition to the youth, they have to be our first focus. But I just wanted to comment on that and say thank you for all the great work you guys are doing.
Thank you.
Councillor Clarke.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. I appreciate the work that's being done with the schools, but as your presentation noted, the youth who are most at risk may not be involved in schools or engaged in that way, and I'm wondering whether you're planning any outreach to FNCS and shelters and those sorts of places that might find more marginalized youth.
Yes, absolutely. I think a big component of the outreach will involve going kind of beyond that high school population and going to those community agencies that do service those types of populations. So we have had requests from a variety of different organizations, and that way they can deliver that information to those specific populations. So it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds with respect to the uptake as we move forward in that way.
Councillor Jowett.
Through the chair, great presentation. Thank you for taking the time. Through the social determinants of health, we see that there are some vulnerable neighborhoods. Are you working with the neighborhood associations as well? Kind of along the same lines as Elizabeth's asked, but are you actually working with the neighborhood associations? I
think Julia can maybe speak a little bit more to that. We're kind of starting our dissemination process and kind of figuring out the different routes to take. Do you have anything to add?
We have just even from our program through the Sexual Assault Domestic Violence Treatment Program, we've done outreach to those community centers, and we've talked about the human trafficking aspect of the services that we deliver, but specifically to this campaign, not at this point. That is the plan. We're just sort of starting slowly, but we just figured this would be a good time with it being Youth Awareness Day on Saturday, that once we get this, we're able to move this forward. And I'd just like to address
Julia, can I just ask you to come to the mic? This is being live streamed and people aren't going to be able to pick up your audio.
Sorry. I just wanted to address Councillor Clarke's question in regards to are we reaching out to vulnerable populations. Detective Demarte is actually working with Family and Children Services. They're doing presentations. We're also looking at working with the group homes. We understand that they're not all in school, but we also see a lot of these victims coming through our program, through Family and Children Services. So our committee, the Multidisciplinary Response to Combat Human Trafficking, we have the opportunity to sit down and sort of look at what areas that we do need to address, and we're representing those vulnerable areas as well. So,
okay. So I'd also like to ask if we are, have we got any sort of way to approach the hotels? I mean, there are a lot of problems around the hotels as using the 401 as the pipeline. And what we do understand is that they turn a blind eye a lot of times to some of this. Is there something we can do better or different to raise awareness there? I think that's a really good intervention point sometimes.
So we do plan to approach the hotels in respects to putting up some of these posters. And I know that the Human Trafficking Unit through WRPS has been working with the hotel owners as well. And my understanding is they've done some presentations to the association that they belong to.
So in St. Catharines, they actually train people to be able to have a signal. Certainly, I'm not going to repeat what the signal is, but they have a signal so that they can speak to any hotelier or anyone that they're approaching in a public place that would be in the know. So they're actually sending a little message around to say, I'm in trouble. So clearly we don't want to communicate that to everybody, but
Right.
Is there a way to, I think it's St. Catharines that's got a program like that. Maybe there's some way to reach out and get some of that as well.
Absolutely. We actually work very closely with the surrounding areas because we see the girls going up and down the corridor, right? So we do work closely. So that is definitely something we can explore.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank Julia and Sarah and Matt as well for the presentation. This is really a bigger issue than maybe most people understand. And so this is yet another piece of the ongoing education program and action program that the Sexual Assault Support Center and the Crime Prevention Council have orchestrated. And it's continuing. So this is just another piece in all that's being done in this regard. And I'm really glad to hear, Councillor Foxton, that you're showing, or you're having Chelsea's story in North Dumfries, because that was one of the initial things that took place in the community. And I might just mention that Chelsea's story was also, I think, performed at the Hotel Association of whatever in Toronto not that long ago, so that the Hotel Association has really taken it on as well. This, of course, is a toolkit that can be used by a variety of agencies and individuals to help people with this. I would mention too that the showing of the film Honeybee next Monday night is sold out. Mm-hmm. So I have my ticket, but Christiane says she might be organizing a second event, and possibly it will be in Cambridge, so that the people, there's quite a waiting list already for next Monday night. So there's enough to do, and there was also an event that the Sexual Assault Support Center and the Crime Prevention Council hosted at the KPL a number of months ago, and I believe, Matt, you were on the panel that night as well. So there's a lot going on in this area. The Chelsea story was shown in Cambridge at the William Davis School, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. And I think they're hoping to do that more often. But this is a toolkit that can be used by a variety of individuals and service providers to help people with who may be vulnerable or involved in this particular problem. So I think we need to keep it up and carry on with these kinds of initiatives to deal with this really ever-present problem in our community.
Thank you. And Councillor Galloway, if you're not going to use that ticket, I understand Chris is on the waiting list. Councillor McGarry.
Thank you very much for coming in and presenting tonight. And in 2015, I was part of the provincial government's special task force to study sexual violence and harassment in a select all-party committee. And that generated about 67 different recommendations that really informed the work of the Sexual Violence and Harassment Action Plan for the province of Ontario. And during that period of time, I worked quite closely actually with Minister Laurie Scott, who is taking a piece of that work and focusing on human trafficking. And we certainly supported her work, and she does continue to advocate strongly, as do we, regarding some of the issues around human trafficking. I was also pleased to note that Waterloo Region was ahead of the curve because of the work of the Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council, who had already identified some of these issues. So we're lucky to have some of those organizations in our community, including male allies. My question on hotels was already asked by, I think, Councillor Jowett, but the other question I had for you, not trying to make work projects, but will you be focusing on some of the work that's needed in the young males and adult male worlds to prevent some of the demand on some of these victims?
We had our committee meeting yesterday, and that was a topic that was broached, that we're seeing, like, we need to have the services for the victims, but how do we intervene and stop the need for these services? And it is to look at the male perspective. So that is something that we are looking to tackle once this campaign is done, is to see how, and not just even in human trafficking, but in domestic violence and sexual assault as well. This was across the board. So yes, because we've heard some, disturbing statistics around young males and what they're, the accessing of pornography on a regular basis and things like that. So their understanding of what a healthy relationship is very distorted to what it actually is. So that has, causing issues as well. So we need to really take a look at that.
Thank you. And if I may, Madam Chair, I think one thing that really surprised me in the work that I did during that year-long committee was the economic impact of not only human trafficking, but prostitution, domestic violence across not only our region, but across Ontario and indeed Canada. It costs our economy billions of dollars, and ongoing needs for high needs of intervention for mental health and addictions counseling. And this is one area that I think we as a region can really impact by driving that wedge in between the demand for services and the victims that are there to serve those demands. So again, congratulations on your work. I'd also like to take some posters home, and I know that my city of Cambridge will be delighted to continue to work with you, especially since the 401 intersects our city, and we know that the hotels along the 401 are at risk for seeing these young victims. Thank you again.
Thank you.
I'll give you some, I promise.
Thank you very much, and I guess your presence here just, I think, really underscores the collaborative partnerships that we have in Waterloo Region, and it's why we can continue to deal with these difficult issues. So thank you, Julia, Sarah, and Matt.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have no further questions. Our next delegation is Iain Klugman, CEO, Communitech, annual update to council. Welcome, Iain.
Thank you, Regional Council and Chair Redmond. I just wanted to appear before you today to give you an update as to the work that we've been doing over the last year. So we're going to just jump right in here. I'd like to save some time at the end for questions. So as we think back to where we've come from, much of the history of this region and helping to understand how we've been able to be so successful as such a small community comes down to the notions and the culture in this community around collaboration, around ambition, and around entrepreneurialism. And we've been able to build over the history of this community some of the largest liquor companies, food processing companies, insurance companies, and tech companies in the history of Canada. And it really is quite remarkable and unexplainable from other perspectives around the world as to how we're able to do this. But when we think back to the genesis of Communitech, it was in the late 80s and 90s. There was some serious structural shifts happening in the economy. Many job losses were occurring. And there was a sense that we had both a threat and an opportunity within the community to say, how do we ensure the long-term prosperity of this community and our country at the same time as ensuring that that we were taking advantage of the sort of emerging opportunities around the universities. And so it was this group of relatively unattractive individuals who got together 20-some years ago to form Communitech with this purpose and really a sense of saying, how do we help people start and grow great companies here to create jobs and prosperity for our region? Of course, today, Communitech has evolved into being over 1,400 members strong, and with a series of programs and services that help companies at every stage along the way. So we help startups with programs that are aligned to help them figure out whether or not they're starting something that people want to buy, which is fairly foundational, and going after a market that's sizable to actually have the kind of impact that they need to have. Increasingly working with scale-ups, and this is something that has, within the last number of years, as a stable of high-growth, high-potential companies have emerged that we've never seen in the history of our community. And we really do feel that we're on the cusp of something remarkable with this incredible group of companies. And then, of course, we've also become the largest open innovation, corporate innovation facility in the world, bringing in not just great brands like Thomson Reuters and TD and Manulife, but also the likes of WSIB, LCBO, and the Royal Canadian Air Force. And so when you think back over the last 12 months, just a tremendous number of interactions, of convening and connecting, and also capital raised and people coming to this great community. As far as making this possible, it's really been the support of really everyone contributing to this initiative. It's one of the hallmarks of our organization is that we are truly a public-private partnership with 55% of our funding coming from the private sector and 45% from the public sector, with literally every level of government participating in this, as well as almost every company in the Waterloo region. And not only are we the second fastest growing market for tech talent in Canada, we're now the fastest growing region in Canada as of last week. We are the only organization in Canada to have a dedicated facility focused on data-driven companies and emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, quantum, and 5G networks. In the past 10 years alone, we've seen literally thousands of startups and billions of dollars in venture capital that have gone into the companies that we've been working with. And ourself, in an assessment by Deloitte, since 2013, we've had over a $1.1 billion impact. So where are we going and what's next? We are increasingly coming back to the core of who we are. We talk a lot about, David Johnson always used to talk about we're a community of barn raisers. We talk a lot about collaboration as being the secret sauce and our ability to achieve more than we really should be able to achieve as a very small community. And it's this notion of collaboratives. And so increasingly we're getting to this idea of, can we stand up collaboratives around big opportunities or big issues we're facing in an intentional fashion? The first one is around the future of work and learning. We're also going to be launching these collaboratives around the future of retail, and the future of mobility, and the future of cities. And really it's saying, how do we get a whole bunch of people together who care about a common either theme or opportunity, and figure out how do we as a community become really good at this and competitive on the global stage? Increasingly, we are becoming a place to convene and connect entrepreneurs and innovators. And we have just launched a program that will establish legal entities in all of the G7 countries that will make it as easy for our great companies to hire salespeople in any of those countries as it is in Canada, and increasingly drive international expansion further and more early in their career, in their life cycle. And of course, True North, which is the big marquee event that had the vision of being a South by Southwest, riding on the spine of the LRT. For the first 2 years, we weren't quite ready with the LRT, so we ran world-class conference at Lot 42. And of course, this year, with the availability of the LRT, we're truly turning this into the festival that we'd always envisioned. We hope to go from 2,500 to 25,000 people this year as part of the festival, and we would like to hit 100,000 people within the next 3 years. When we think about our priorities as an organization, it really is about growth of the companies, growth of the ecosystem, growth of our economy. And in the last year, we've had some really significant successes in this great collaborative known as Communitech. Well, that's my presentation. Thank you very much, and I welcome any questions you might have.
Great presentation and great news as always, Iain. Councillor Vrbanovic.
Thank you very much, Chair Redmond, and Iain, thank you very much for coming in with your annual presentation. I know there'll be other opportunities to say this, but as I did at Kitchener Council, this will probably be your last annual report since you announced your retirement. And so I really wanted to take this opportunity to thank you for your leadership at Communitech over many years, for what you and your team have taken that organization to, and how you really, through your leadership, helped develop our tech and innovation ecosystem. I know as we talked, whether it's people in the industry, people in other sectors, and talk about what's happening in this region, most of them are quite blown away by it all, to be frank. And certainly the work that Communitech has played in helping shape all of that has been important. My question to you as you go forward, and you talked about some of the things that Communitech's going to be doing over the next while, but what do you need us to do as regional government and municipal governments in this region as we go forward into this next phase? I think part of it is, you don't want us to take our pedal off our foot off the accelerator pedal, but from your perspective, how can we continue to best help you and the ecosystem going forward?
Well, that's a really good question. I think that the difference there's a couple of things that are going on right now that are fundamentally changing the way that we think about our work. One of which is that traditionally there were tech companies and there were non-tech companies, and as all markets are being digitized, of course, that distinction is becoming less and less relevant. We see Toby Lutke, who's the CEO of Shopify, saying, "I'm not a tech company, I'm a commerce company that uses technology," and you see Roy Gorey, who's the CEO of Manulife Global, saying we need to move from being an insurance company to being a tech company because the world's being digitized. And so we really see every industry at this point in time on a digital journey, not just the big companies, but also all forms of government. And what that means, of course, is there's going to be increasingly a scarcity of talent, because it's not just software companies that are hiring software developers. It's Linamar and Manulife. And so there's a few things. Global competitiveness and jurisdictional competitiveness is going to be driven by our ability to attract and retain talent. And so we really need to be thinking about, are we competitive as a community? Do we have the kind of healthcare system? Do we have the kind of educational system? Do we have the parks and rec? Do we have the cool things to do? We have the livable cities, the public transportation. They're going to be able to win over places like Portland and Seattle. And I think that is really the point of competition, of competitiveness on a go-forward basis, is the ability to attract and retain talent. And while factoring into the decisions that people make about where they want to invest their time and their lives are the jobs, it also, and it is increasingly so, are these other factors of what is it like to live there, and can I afford to have a house, and are there things to do? And so really, I think that you're playing increasingly a role in our ability to be successful as a community by the non-technical aspects of what we're trying to do.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Erb.
Thank you for the presentation and the leadership you're giving this. You mentioned briefly retention. How are we doing at retention with the startups, and how many are staying in our community?
I would say that the vast majority of the companies are staying in our community. I think that traditionally people would raise money in Silicon Valley and they would move their company there, and increasingly people are seeing that actually it's advantageous to keep their companies here. A lot of it has to do with talent loyalty that just doesn't exist in the Valley. This is a tight talent market locally, but it's nothing like the Valley. And I think increasingly people are really shying away from what is happening in the Valley, and the way that the kinds of values that they bring to bear as they build their companies are inconsistent with what we would build and the kind of values we would bring as Canadians to the way we would construct companies.
And I think some of the things that you just talked about in response to Mayor Vrbanovic, the other services that we can provide the region is significant for the retention. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Iain, for all the leadership that you've provided to Communitech, the tremendous success it's had, recognized at the federal and provincial level as a key industry association, and it's pretty specific to our local area. I can't let it go without asking how you're going to use the LRT for True North. So I know you're going to use it as the spine, but what does that mean? You're going to have various locations along the route that are going to have the various events and presentations?
Exactly. And so I think that, what really struck us about South by Southwest was that there was an organization that built a big umbrella, a big tent, ran some signature events, but basically made it into an organic festival so that people could bring their own ideas and their own initiatives to it. And we've had just a tremendous response. We've got companies that want to run sessions, events, and summits every night. We've got, the BIAs fully involved. We've got universities. We've got the Waterloo Region Police Service who wants to be part of this. And so we really feel that we've struck something here, a key, and that people really see this as something that is meaningful to them and they want to be part of it. And so for us now, the challenge is saying, okay, how do we make this as easy as possible for people to figure out their way of contributing? The idea of the LRT was always to say, multiple venues up and down the spine from, the one end to the other, and really, sort of putting to work all the venues that we've got, whether they're, big facilities like Centre in the Square all the way down to, small meetups and open houses.
Terrific.
I see no further questions. Thank you very much, Iain, and it's a proud legacy that you're leaving as you head on in a couple of months to the next chapter.
Thank you. And if I might make one comment about legacies, I did want to take the opportunity to thank the people in this room and the municipalities for their ongoing support. It always is a critical signal to federal and provincial investors, and often the first question is, are your municipalities behind you in investing in what you're doing? I'm always able to say yes, overwhelmingly yes, so thank you for that. I also want to take an opportunity to thank Mike Murray for his partnership over the years. We share a birthday. He's older than I am, as you all can recognize clearly. But I also think that, Mike has done such a spectacular job and has been such a great partner over the years, and we're going to miss him. So thank you, Mike. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you. Colleagues, I'd ask you to I'd entertain a motion to pass the minutes of previous meetings, moved by Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. Communications, council should have gotten an information package distributed electronically. Are there any questions about that communication? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to go into the Committee of the Whole to consider reports. Moved by Councillor Foxton, seconded by Councillor Erb. All those in favor? That is carried. Councillor Strickland.
Yes, Madam Chair. As we move into finance reports, I'd like to move the finance report with the awarding of the tender for the GRT bus maintenance facility and to speak to it briefly.
Go ahead.
So you'll see that from the finance reports that's a fairly significant tender. It's not too often that we award projects over $100 million at the Regional Waterloo. And I think it's important to note that a couple things. Transit is a very big ticket item, and we're continuing to make all the investments that we need to develop a modernized transit system, not only for ION, but also for traditional transit. And this is a large facility. It's 300,000 square feet. It's going to be able to accommodate 200 buses. You can see some of the details in there, repair bays and so on. So I think it's important to note that there's a lot of expenses that are required to build a modern transit system. Over and above putting buses on the road, we also need to have maintenance facilities to manage that fleet. And I'd also like to indicate that 73% of that 104 million is being funded by the federal government. So that's an important point to note as well, Madam Chair. So I'm pleased to make that motion that we approve that tender for the maintenance facility.
Councillor Strickland, are you moving all of the finance reports or just that one?
I can if you would like, Madam Chair.
Okay, moved by Councillor Strickland, seconded by Councillor Rentz. Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to speak to that one as well, much in the same way as Councillor Strickland. This is certainly a pretty significant day. We only spent $260 $60 million on our LRT system in terms of our own investment. This is a very significant investment in transit. This will be the 4th maintenance facility that we have in our community. 3 for conventional bus and 1 for light rail vehicles. And as Councillor Strickland indicated, a modern transit system, an effective modern transit system that we're building really needs these infrastructure pieces. It's not just about 4-wheeled vehicles or LRT vehicles. It's about the facilities that we have to maintain these vehicles and the staff that we employ to do that. This particular facility is going to be built for the future. It will have a space that will be fitted out in future periods of time as we grow our system. And it is, as Councillor Strickland indicated, largely funded through the federal government. So we're very fortunate not just to have that funding and of course then our own funding. I would note that this project did come in basically on budget. There was concern, of course, at the beginning of the process that it might go over budget, but it did come in essentially on budget. It's a 2-year build, so it'll be a while before we can actually utilize it, but it gives us a maintenance facility in the north end of the urban transit system to maintain a large fleet of vehicles, and probably will reduce the costs or future expansion requirements of our other facilities, because we will have expansion capacity here on Northfield Drive. So it's a very significant investment we're making for the community. These facilities often go unnoticed. You know, we notice the buses on the road or the LR vehicles on the track, but these facilities are really critical to the efficient and effective operation of our transit system.
Thank you. Councillor Vrbanovic.
Thank you very much, Chair Redmond, and I too just wanted to make some comments on this and one of the other tenders, and in particular acknowledge the federal government for the investments in not only our transit system, but in transit systems of large urban centers across the country. This is something that we've been advocating for some time, being able to see stable, predictable funding based on ridership coming forward. That we can count on in terms of the transit system. It's necessary if we're going to grow a modern transit system going forward, and I believe that it's imperative that this kind of investment continues in the future. But we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the government for this significant investment, because it does allow us to respond in a way that the community expects from us. The second piece that I just wanted to touch on was the tender with respect to the transit shelters. And I know just this past week there was some comment on social media, and I've seen, and heard comments raised with me in the past, just sometimes how long it takes when the glass at some of these gets vandalized or broken for it to be repaired. And does our contract actually, does this speak to that, or is that under a separate maintenance contract?
Thomas, would you like to answer that? Mr. Schmidt?
I believe it would be under this contract, but I'll check into it and get back to you.
Okay.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
And just to underscore one of the comments Councillor Vrbanovic made, and that is that some of these funds, as a matter of fact, several of these funds are actually a partnership with the federal and the provincial government. And I think it speaks to one of the themes that I think this council has been very articulate in putting forward to other levels of government, and that's that no one level of government can do it by itself. So those kinds of partnerships and the investment in the long-term planning for a community that's growing as rapidly and has the demands that Waterloo Region has is really key to moving forward. So again, we've had moved and seconded all of the recommendations up to page 19. So all those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. On to committee reports. We have Planning and Public Works. Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll move the 8 recommendations from the Planning and Works Committee. There are no additional reports from closed.
Seconded by Councillor Foxton. All those in favor? That is carried. Finance and Admin.
I'd like to move Finance and Admin. Motions as written.
Okay, that is moved by Councillor Jowett, seconded by Councillor Rentz. Councillor Clarke, did you want to speak to this? Oh, okay. I see no speakers. All those in favor? That is carried unanimously. Councillor Rentz, Community Services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's one recommendation from the Community Services Committee, and it's regarding the new Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit Program. I would move that.
Moved by Councillor Rentz, seconded by Councillor Kiefer. All those in favor? That is carried unanimously. I asked this at my peril, but Mr. Murray, do you have any comments? Saved it all up for that retirement announcement, right? There is another matter to consider in a committee of the whole, and that is a report, third-party review of the Regional Children's Services, and I believe Mr. Bartholomew Saunders, are you going to speak to this?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, the report before you would not normally come to Council, but if you look at the tight timeframes that there are within it, I felt it was necessary to bring it forward in order for us to achieve the goal of completion of the review before we enter into budget negotiations for 2021. This is directly, this relates directly to the KPMG review that was done in 2019, that subsequent to which Council approved several actions coming out of that, one of which was to have a third-party review of the operation of the regional children's center, regional licensed children's centers. This is before you for approval and for the appointment of up to 5 regional councillors to work with staff and a community expert moving forward.
Thank you. I'd also note that Barb Cardo's in the audience. Thank you for being here to answer any questions. Would someone like to move the recommendation? This has been flagged, and as Mr. Bartholomew Saunders said, something we've been working towards for a long time. Moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Harris. So I'm going to look to Mr. Councillor Kiefer. Are you volunteering?
I am so.
Thank you. So I heard 5. Councillor Harris.
I'd like to volunteer.
Councillor Foxton. Oh. Councillor Rentz.
Yep.
Councillor Foxton. That's good. And Councillor Shantz, I have. Oh, Councillor Erb. Okay. Okay. So Councillor Foxton is stepping back, so we have Councillor Erb and Councillor Shantz. Thank you all for volunteering. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much. Motion for the Committee of Whole to rise and Council to resume. Moved by Councillor Kiefer, seconded by Councillor Nowak. All those in favor? That is carried. A motion to adopt proceedings of the Committee of the Whole. Moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Jaworski. All those in favor? Any motions? Notices of motion? Any unfinished business? Other business? Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, Madam Chair, just a reminder that this Saturday we're having the Heritage Day celebrations in New Dundee at the Community Centre, and it's a celebration of the places of worship. And we're looking forward to a large crowd. They have a lot of people signed up to be there to represent their different faiths.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. You do know how to throw a party.
That we do.
I'd entertain a motion to enact the bylaws first, second, and third readings, moved by Councillor McGarry, seconded by Councillor Schatz. All those in favor? That is carried. And now a motion to adjourn, moved by Councillor Harris, seconded by Councillor Schatz. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Council is adjourned.